Evening, everybody. Did you manage to get a worksheet? Got some back there. This is our last Wednesday night in our tour of the Bible. I had hoped to get farther, but the tour is about finished. We'll just have to close it here. Going through, finishing up Joshua tonight. We've been in chapter 8. We're going to go back to it. That's where we're starting. Book of Joshua, the conquest of Canaan. See how much you remember. The first two cities taken by Israel in Canaan were Jericho and Ai. You might need help spelling Jericho. You won't need help spelling Ai. Which takes us through most of chapter 8. The balance of the book is the continuation of the blank through its completion. And that word would be conquest. The continuation of the conquest through its completion with several notable happenings. Number one, the first notable happening is still here in chapter 8. Chapter 8, 30 through 35. Need a reader, Joshua chapter 8, 30 to 35. Who wants to read that for us? Finish out that chapter. All right, Janie.
Joshua built an altar to the Lord, the God of Israel, on Mount Temple, just as Moses, the servant of the Lord, had commanded the people of Israel, as it is written in the book of the law of Moses. An altar of uncut stones, upon which no man has wielded an iron tool. And they offered on it burnt offerings to the Lord, and sacrificed peace offerings. And there, in the presence of the people of Israel, he wrote on the stones a copy of the law of Moses, which he had written. And all the Israel sojourner, as well as native born, with their elders and officers and their judges, stood on the opposite sides of the ark before the Levitical priests, who carried the ark of the covenant of the Lord, half of them in front of Mount Gerizim, and half of them in front of Mount Ebal, just as Moses, the servant of the Lord, had commanded at the first to bless the people of Israel. And afterward he read all the words of the law, the blessings and the curse, according to all that is written in the book of the law. There was not a word of all that Moses commanded that Joshua did not read before all the assembly of Israel, and the women and the little ones and the sojourners who lived among them.
Very good. Thank you, Jay. So they've conquered Jericho, and they've conquered Ai, and now this takes place. Following the conquest of Ai, Joshua built an altar of blank, uncut stones, upon which no tool had acted. As it is written in the law of Moses, he also wrote on prepared stones, and this goes back to Deuteronomy 27, 2-3, where Moses said, when you do this, set up stones and coat them with lime and write on that lime-covered stone. A copy of the blank. What was written on those stones? The law. In the presence of the people. So everybody's watching. They're watching Joshua have these stones covered in lime. And I don't know that Joshua is doing this himself. He's probably there overseeing this work. But there is an altar that's built. These stones are set up and prepared. The law is written on these stones. This is a big deal. As Moses had directed earlier, half the people stood in front of which mountain? Gerizim. Jamie, I got you in just a second. And the other in front of Mount Ebal. And Joshua read all the words of the law with its blank and blank to them. Blessings and cursings. Very good. Jamie?
The point to ask was the law, the Ten Commandments, or everything that's like written in Deuteronomy.
I think it's everything. The context seems to beg for everything, because the Ten Commandments would have been really quick, really fast, and he could have done that. But when he reads to the people the blessings and the cursings, you have to get the rest of the law for those. And it seems as though this is a process where they hear the law and they respond. And that's what it seems to me. It's a good question, though, because the Ten Commandments are basically the embodiment of the law, but there's a whole lot more to the law besides that. Good question. Number 2, this is from Joshua chapter 9, verses 1 to 27. We won't read the entire text, but you can be looking at it as we're talking about it. And this is about the Gibeonites. Pretty smooth operators, knowing, like Paul wrote when he wrote to the church at Corinth, says, knowing the terror of the Lord, we persuade men. And the Gibeonites knew the terror of Israel. They had heard everything that they had done up to this point. And so they disguised themselves to look like road-weary travelers, and they brought along moldy, crumbledy bread and old wineskins that looked like they been on a long journey, and they were from just around the corner. And they came and had Israel fooled well enough that they said, well, these guys are from way off in the corner or somewhere, anywhere. Let's just make a covenant with them. And then they found out, well, these guys are right here in our backyard. So that's what the Gibeonites did. So let's fill in a few blanks here. The Gibeonites' guile, hearing what Israel had done, all the Canaanite kings blanked to fight Joshua. They united. All the Israelite kings united to fight Joshua. The Gibeonites, however, having heard particularly of the conquest of blank and blank, Jericho and Ai, I wanted to put those, I know we put those in there already, but I wanted to be in there again because this made the headlines. People heard about this and they knew, wow, Jericho fell, and then Ai fell right after that. These people are going to sweep across the land. That was what was in their minds. They used the ruse to fool Joshua and the men of Israel into thinking they were from a blank blank, a far country, and so sought to make a blank of peace. A treaty, the word that the Israelites would later use is covenant. So you can say treaty if you want, or a covenant of peace, so they would not be destroyed. Apparently, I say apparently because it's not in the text, but that's what leads me to say apparently, as it had been with Ai, there was no blank, blank, blank for instruction as what to do. What would you put in those 3 blanks? Asking of God or calling on God. Now I say apparently because they are in the dark and they're proceeding without instruction, and things are not going well whenever that seems to happen. Kirk.
Choir of the Lord, so.
That makes it pretty clear, doesn't it? So, and how did I miss that? It says it right there. So the men of Israel took some of their provisions and did not ask for the counsel. Well, duh. Man, I missed a great opportunity to put that right there in the text. Y'all want to wait for about 15 minutes? I'll go back and retype this and come back with a new worksheet. Thanks, Kirk. Where are we here? There was no calling on God for instruction as to what to do. It was not until blank blank after making the covenant with the Gibeonites, and that would be 3 days. 3 days later, they discovered that they were close neighbors, and they were already bound by an oath that they would not kill them. So they put them in blank to the blank of God. Service or servitude to the house of God. Cutting wood for the sacrifice and drawing water. So they had a service that they rendered Israel in place of being slaughtered. Was there another hand? Did I miss a hand? Okay. All right, Joshua chapter 10, 1 through 15. Let's do some reading here. Let's split this up, and I need a reader. Let's see. 1 through 5, and then 6 through 15. Who'll take 1 through 5? All right, Carrie, 1 through 5, and then 6 through 15. Hand in the back, is that Jamie? All right.
Zedek, king of Jerusalem, heard that Joshua had captured Ai and had utterly destroyed it, just as he had done to Jericho and its king, so he had done to Ai and its king, and that the inhabitants of Gibeon had made peace with Israel, and were within their land. That he feared greatly, because Gibeon was a great city, like one of the royal cities, and because it was greater than Ai, and all its men were mighty. Therefore Adoni-Zedek, king of Jerusalem, sent word to Hoham, king of Hebron, and Piram, king of Jarmuth, and to Japhia, king of Lachish, and to Debir, king of Eglon, saying, Come up to me and help me, and let us attack Gibeon, for it has made peace with Joshua and with the sons of Israel. So the 5 kings of the Amorites, the king of Jerusalem, the king of Hebron, the king of Jarmuth, the king of Lachish, and the king of Eglon gathered together and went up, they with all their armies, encamped by Gibeon and fought against it.
And the men of Gibeon sent to Joshua at the camp at Gilgal, saying, Do not forsake your servants. Come up to us quickly, save us and help us. For all the kings of the Amorites who dwell in the mountains have gathered together against us. So Joshua ascended from Gilgal, he and all the people of war with him, and the mighty men of valor. And the Lord said to Joshua, Do not fear them, for I have delivered them into your hand. Not a man of them shall stand before you. Joshua therefore came upon them suddenly, having marched all night from Gilgal. So the Lord routed them before Israel, killed them with a great slaughter at Gibeon, chased them along the road that goes to Beth-horon, and struck them down as far as Azekah and Makkedah. And it happened as they fled before Israel and were on the descent of Beth-horon, that the Lord cast down large hailstones from heaven on them as far as Azekah, and they died. There were more who died from the hailstones than the children of Israel killed with the sword. Then Joshua spoke to the Lord in the day when the Lord delivered up the Amorites before the children of Israel, and said in the sight of Israel, Sun, stand still over Gibeon, and moon in the valley of Ajalon. So the sun stood still, and the moon stopped, till the people had revenge upon their enemies. Is it not written in the book of Jasher, So the sun stood still in the midst of the heaven, and did not hasten to go down for a whole day? And there has been no day like that before it or after it, that the Lord heeded the voice of a man, for the Lord fought for Israel. Then Joshua returned all Israel with him to the camp at Gilgal.
Very good. Thank you all. Gibeah was now blanked by the Canaanites because of their covenant with Israel. They were attacked. Gibeonites got together and attacked them. They were a strong city, and they thought, well, if these guys become allied with the Israelites, we won't have any hope at all, so let's attack Gibeah. The men of Gibeah asked Joshua for help. God instructed Joshua, do not blank them, do not fear them, for I have given them into your hands. Not one of them shall blank before you. Stand, not one of them shall stand before you. Isn't that interesting? God says, like he said about Jericho and like he said about Ai, before they had conquered those towns, I've given them to you. They are yours. Having marched all night from Gilgal, by the way, do you remember what the name Gilgal means? Means what? Gilgal means a rolling. That's where God rolled away the contempt of Egypt. Let's go back and check that real quick. Chapter 5.
After they left Egypt in the desert.
Yes, they came into the promised land and they camped at Gilgal. That's what this place was named. Chapter 5 and verse 9, the Lord said to Joshua, today I have rolled away the reproach of Egypt from you. So the name of that place is called Gilgal, rolling to this day. So that's where they're still camping, in Gilgal. It was a good spot to set up camp. So they marched all night from Gilgal, and Israel attacked the Canaanites, and God blanked them. He confounded the enemy, and struck them down with, what he cast down on them? Hailstones. So God confuses the enemy. By the way, if you're any kind of a military historian or a tactician, that's the first thing you want to do is try to wipe out communications. I don't know if you saw any of the video, the pictures from the attack that the Russians have made on Ukraine. Some of the things that they tried to hit first were radio towers. It looked like, the Russians are attacking, and they show you this picture of this little thing out in the middle of nowhere. And what's that? It doesn't look like anything, unless you realize, oh, that's a radio tower. They're trying to knock out communications. And so God he's confounding the enemy. They're confused. They don't know what's going on. You can't fight very well when you're confused and have no idea what's happening. So he does that. And while they're confounded, Israel is coming to fight against them, slaying them with the sword. And then God begins to cast down his hailstones from heaven. And what's it say about that? As more of the enemy were killed from the hailstones than from the sword. That's called direct fire. Indirect fire is when you know the enemy's over there somewhere and you shoot it up there and try to hit them, but direct fire is when they're right there, shoot right at them, boom. That's what God was doing, laying that direct fire down. Speaking to God, Joshua commanded the blank and blank to stand still. How about that? The sun and the moon to stand still, and God consented for it to be so until they had avenged themselves on their enemies. This day is recorded as unique in that the Lord blanked to the voice of a man. He listened to the voice of a man, the text says, because the Lord fought for Israel. Do you remember a similar time when Israel was at war and Moses was holding his hands up? And as long as he held his hands up, they were victorious. Then he got tired and put his hands down and they'd start to lose. What happened? They pushed a stone up there for Moses to sit on, and Joshua, and I'm not sure if the other one was Caleb. It might have been Caleb, but Joshua and somebody else stood by Moses and helped him hold his arms up so he wouldn't have to do it all himself. And they whooped him. I just get reminded over and over and over again that when God does things, it's never the way I would have expected things to have been done. His way is always better. Preston.
It's in chapter, I think it's 5, verse 13, where it came to pass that Joshua was by Jericho, and he lifted his eyes and looked, and behold, a man stood opposite of him with his sword drawn in his hand. And he was like the leader of God's army. There's not a lot there as far as other than what is said. But is this guy still with Israel? They're defeating people, but is he there with him? I think about, God and the hailstones, and he's with you. Don't fear him. I've given them to you. But then I keep thinking about this commander, and And it doesn't really say other than this, just that one blip. Do you have any more information on that?
There's no more reference made to him. If everybody's familiar with what Preston's talking about, the captain of the Lord's host that he meets early on in the book of Joshua, and Joshua sees him and he says, "Are you for us or are you against us?" And he says, "I'm captain of the Lord's host. Take your shoes off, you're on holy ground." And that's the guy. But I don't believe he's still with them in that sense, or else it would have been so natural to always turn to him. All right, we're attacking Ai. Now what should we do? You're captain of the Lord's host. But he doesn't, you don't see him doing that. They would have said, well, these guys are coming, they're saying that we should make a covenant with them of peace. What do you think? Because you're the captain of the Lord's host. There's nothing like that going on. I don't know that that means he's not there, but there's just nothing to indicate that he was still at this point. But it's a good question. All right, I'm sorry. Oh, Aaron and her? So it wasn't Joshua. Okay, my bad. Those guys that were holding up Moses' hands, that was Aaron and her. Not H-E-R, but H-U-R. You saw him in the movie, didn't you? No, well, actually, that was his son, Ben-Hur. Ben means son of, so it was Ben-Hur, son of her. It was her son of none. Catholic leader, I guess. It scares me the way my mind works sometimes, or doesn't work. That's even scarier. All right, number 4, Joshua chapter 11, verses 21 to 22. Just those 2 verses. Who would like to read that for us? You looking at the big words? All right, Bob's got it.
Joshua came at that time and cut off the Anakim from the hill country, from Hebron and from Debir, from Anab, and from all the hill country of Judah, and from all the hill country of Israel. Joshua utterly destroyed them and their cities. There were no Anakim left in the land of the sons of Israel, only in Gaza, in Gath, and in Ashdod some remained.
All right. The record shows that Joshua killed the blank. Anakim. That's how I would pronounce it. By the way, I put it in the next line, so if you had any trouble spelling, you could just reference that. Joshua killed the Anakim in every place except for a few of the Anakim that remained in Gaza, blank, Gath, and Ashdod. Why did I leave that blank for Gath? Goliath. Goliath was from Gath. How many brothers did he have? He had 4 brothers. And see, it doesn't say this in the text, but when you're reading about David preparing to fight Goliath, he goes down to the stream, and how many pebbles does he get out? He gets 5. Now, I know when I hunt, I take a lot more than I think I'm going to need to kill whatever I'm looking for. But I don't know what David was thinking. And some speculate, well, he got 5 stones because he knew there was Goliath and his 4 brothers, and he might have to fight the 4 brothers. Well, okay, maybe. It's just interesting that those are the numbers that we're told about. It doesn't say that David went down to the stream and got some stones, or that he already had some stones. It just tells us he got 5 stones. And then we find out that there's Goliath and 4 brothers. So make of that what you will. That's not even in Joshua, is it? Why am I talking about that? Because all this stuff is tied together. Charles?
I'm simple. What I'm putting together is, so if the Israelites had done their job in the first place, David and Goliath wouldn't have even happened.
Yes. Yes.
In that area, if Israel had done, I don't want to overspeak what is actually going on, but if Israel had done what God had told them to, then some of the conditions that exist in that part of the world right now would not exist, because they wouldn't exist. They would have been wiped out.
Moses had warned them, when you go into the nation, kill everybody. Kill them all, because any that you leave will become thorns in your sides. And he used the word snares. and their gods and their religion will become a snare to you, which, Lord willing, we'll bring that up a little bit as we conclude tonight's lesson. Maybe kind of see how that figures in. But that's what they did. They failed to do exactly what God had said with regard to several different peoples. Number 5, Joshua 13:13. Somebody want to read that one verse? There's several verses that go along with it, but just that one verse is all we need to get started. Who's got it? Joshua 13:13. All right, Titus has got it.
People of Israel did not drive out the Geshurites or the Maccathites, but Gesher and Machath dwell in the midst of Israel to this day.
Okay. In some places, it says, Israel did not blank the inhabitants. Fully drive out or completely drive out. They did not completely drive them out. That means they drove them out some, maybe even mostly drove out, just like with the Anakim. They killed almost all of them, except there were a few left in those 3 towns. That's what it says. 13:13 tells of the Gesher, that's supposed to be I missed that. Of the Geshurites and the Maacathites who continued dwelling alongside Israel. There you go. Go to all that trouble to make a blank, and then I tell you what's in the blank. So you don't even have to think about it. So they're dwelling alongside the Israelites. Chapter 15, verse 63 says, the Jebusites where were the Jebusites? Jerusalem. Now, it wasn't Jerusalem then. It didn't become Jerusalem until later when David took it. But that's what the town would become known as. The Jebusites in Jerusalem cohabited with Israel, as did those in Gezer and several towns in Manasseh. So you kind of get the picture. The Israelites move in. They're fighting and warring against these nations. And the battle gets so far, and it's like, we've killed most of these people off. Let's not mess with the rest of them. And they just don't. They don't follow through. And I'm so happy that we're not like that today. That we completely do everything fully the way the Lord teaches us, and we never wait and back off before the job's completely done. But that's what they did. All right. Back page, number 6. Joshua chapter 11, verse 23, 21, 43 to 45, and 23, 14. All recount statements claiming that God had given Israel all the blank he had blanked them, all the land he had promised them. Those statements are recounted. They're made and recounted. This is in spite of the fact that several groups of Canaanites blanked in the land. You could say remained, stayed, persisted in the land. The claim is true that God fulfilled his promises and can be said to be true in at least 2 ways. Number 1, God had given them the land even if Israel had not taken blank of it. Possession. God gives it to them. It's yours. Go get it. Well, we'll go get most of it, but they don't take all of it. Well, I gave you all of it. Take all of it. No, just take most of it. Okay. But I'm not the failure here. I gave it to you. I promised it and I gave it to you. That's what could be said from God and anybody else that looked at the situation. The land remained theirs, just as Jericho and Ai were theirs, blank they ever set foot in those cities. Before. Jericho and Ai belonged to Israel before they set foot in those cities. So God gave them the land. Did Israel take it? Not altogether. It would be the same thing if you set aside I don't know, maybe you bought one of your children or grandchildren 4 or 5 cars. Let's see, they'll need an economical car to commute in. They'll need a pickup truck to haul stuff in. They'll need a big old van to take family trips in. And they'll need a big old truck to pull the boat down to the lake. Whatever. What else are they going to need? Oh, you need a 4-wheel drive to go hunting and fishing. Duh. Of course. And so you buy them and you give them to them. And when they go to pick them up, they only pick up 4 of them. Did you fail or did they fail? You didn't fail. You bought and paid for them. You signed for them. You gave them those vehicles, and they failed to take possession. Yes?
Story of man from the beginning, in every instance along the way. And then when finally God comes as man, he doesn't fail. He finishes what he starts. And he's about his Father's business in every aspect of his life. And so when you say a while ago they didn't take it, I think it's the same with us in the New Testament. It's there for us to take, but we have to take it. We have to take it all if we want to receive.
What's probably the most popular passage in the Bible? Wouldn't you say maybe John 3:16 is in at least the top 5? What's it say? For God so loved the world that he gave his only begotten Son, that whosoever believes in him could have what? Everlasting life. Has God given everlasting life to everyone? He's provided it. It's yours for the taking. But people don't avail themselves of it. God has fulfilled his promise. That's why Jesus on the cross, one of the things he said on the cross, not the last thing, but one of the things he said was, "It is finished. I did what I came to do. I fulfilled the Father's plan, and so it was finished." And then finally, the last thing he said, what was it? With a loud voice, "Into your hands I commend my spirit." What's that? Yes, it's finished. That's why we know he fulfilled everything God wanted him to do. Oh, come on now. Number 2, Israel had certainly overwhelmed the land and blank blank. What I would put there would be the words taken over, so to speak, having become the dominant force in Canaan in spite of the fact that Canaanites remained. And this has been a common historical occurrence all over the globe. Every time a nation has moved in and conquered another nation, they very seldom kicked everybody out that was in there. Hardly ever does that happen. They usually incorporate those people in one way or another into the new regime, the new situation, the new circumstance. And that's what is happening with Israel, even though that wasn't God's plan. Number 7. Joshua 24, Joshua's farewell address and death. Joshua recounts God's blank of Israel and the many ways he had blanked them up to that time. In the first blank, I would put deliverance. God delivered them. He goes back and he talks about all the things that God had done to bring them out of Egypt up to that point in time, and the many ways he had helped them. And then he says, if it's disagreeable in your sight to serve blank blank. If it's disagreeable in your sight to serve the Lord. Now, why would he say that? You've heard it. I've heard it. You see signs where it's carved in wood, etched in metal. This passage is a very popular passage, and for good reason. But why would Joshua say, if it's distasteful to you to serve the Lord? And then what does he say after that? You want to serve the gods of your fathers from the other side of the river, or do you want to serve the gods of the Amorites in whose land you now dwell? What? Why would he even bring that up? Because that's what they were tending to do. That's why he was bringing that up. That was their constant tendency. That's what got them in trouble all along the way, among other things. But as for blank and blank blank, Joshua says, as for me and my house, we will serve the Lord. The book closes with the pretentious statement, Israel served the Lord, blank, blank, blank of Joshua, all the days of Joshua, and all the days of the blank who survived Joshua, elders who survived Joshua, and had known all the blank of the Lord, which he had done for Israel. All the deeds of the Lord, or works of the Lord, which he had done for Israel. And then when you go to Judges chapter 2, verse 6 through 10, it says a generation arose after all these guys had died out that did not know the Lord. And that's when all the mess starts that becomes the book of Judges. The rebellion, the retribution, the repentance, the restoration, and then you go right back to rebellion. It's a constant cycle in the book of Judges. Comments? Don?
That you didn't mention all the verses, I don't think, but the verses that say that they did take control of all the land, because I mean, it says that they did, and it also says that God fulfilled all his promises, but it also says they didn't take all the land.
Right.
And that's something for today that is an issue with different religions and different things, as some say they have yet to get all the land, and God's still going to fulfill his promise someday. And he's already fulfilled it. They're not, and so that's sometimes why, Israel still looks at some of those zealots over there in Israel, some of the Israelis. There's small groups, but they say, we're still wanting to get all of our land, we're told right here, and then that's the objections to the Iranians or everybody else are like, hey, there's some people over here that want to come get us too, so that's, at least that's their thoughts. But anyway, I've heard that in the past, years and years ago, that, well, Israel still hadn't got all the land God promised, and so it's...
And I think you and I talked about this too, that later on when David became king, David had campaigns where he went out and he warred against the people who lived in those places, and he took in those properties, those areas, those land masses that were always promised to Israel. And even while I believe when Joshua states it at that time, it was absolutely true that God had fulfilled his promise and given them everything he promised to give them, whether they took possession of it or not. But certainly later on when David came and did his conquests, everything that God had promised Israel became theirs. So.
It does say, every place on which the sole of your foot treads, I have given it to you, just as I've spoken to Moses. In other places, after that he lists the boundaries, but he also says, wherever you tread your foot, I'm giving it to you. So if you don't tread your foot there, but it's given to you, so he fulfilled his promise.
Time's gone. Appreciate you guys. Yes, John?
Joshua became a great leader and didn't have a father.
Here we go.
He was the son of none.
The son of none. Yes, well. Yeah, he's one of our shepherds too. Appreciate you guys. Lord bless you.